AutismBC talks on floor time. I'm Sarah. I'm Vancouver Island Regional Coordinator. I'm here in Victoria, which is the traditional land of the Lekwungen speaking people. As Brock said, he's going to be around for the back end. So feel free to put any questions you have in the chat. If you're having any technical difficulties, write that in the chat and we'll hopefully get that sorted. So thank you so much. Keith and Alysha are here today from Little Buddies Pediatric Therapy. They are occupational therapists. They're gonna talk to us about floor time. I'm gonna start off with a couple of questions that some members have sent in ahead of time, and then we'll be happy to take questions at the end. Again, as Brock said, if you don't want your question to be in the recording, just send us a message and we can figure that out for you, no problem. So I think we'll start off with maybe just a brief introduction from our presenters for our members, if that's okay with you guys.
Great. I'm Keith Landherr, and I'm an occupational therapist, and I'm a certified floor time instructor, and I'm in the process of doing a PhD in infant mental health and developmental disabilities, and I look forward to being done with that.
There we go. And my name's Alysha. I'm Keith's counterpart here at Little Buddies. I'm an OT as well, and have certification as a floor time practitioner, as well as in a play project consultant, which is a different model, but different program, sorry, but based off of all of the principles that we're going to be talking about today in floor time. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this. So, I mean, if you could just start off with maybe some basic principles of floor time and a little introduction to what that means, that'd be great.
Just gonna pull up my screen. That's all clear for everybody?
That looks great to me.
Wonderful. I also just want to say thank you as well to both you, Brock and Sarah, for grounding us in our land acknowledgements and just resonating with that piece for where we are today. It's always an important place to start. And I also just want to acknowledge that, you know, within the world of neurodiversity, I'm one of many amongst a large spectrum, and I'm sure there are going to be things today that will resonate with some and not with others. And you know, I always want to just say that I'll humbly accept feedback if anybody wants to jump in at any point that says, "Oh, that doesn't quite sit right." I love to hear that kind of thing at the end of the day to keep learning. So floor time, this is where we're going to start. And the biggest thing that we always want to start with is just recognizing that it's all about relationships. So what it is and what it isn't. DIR floor time is an individualized approach designed for children with autism spectrum disorder and developmental delay. And it's an approach that's tailored to the unique strengths, interests, and challenges of each child. It's a model that highlights the power of relationships and emotional connections to fuel development. What it isn't, right, is rather than targeting skills and isolation, it focuses on nurturing critical social, emotional, developmental milestones for lifelong learning. So this is an approach that is broad, and we're going to kind of slide across the surface of things and touch upon kind of the broad points of it. But what's really important to remember is it's a developmental approach that's designed to foster kind of foundational learning capacities that we need for all levels of learning, from basic self-regulation skills all the way up to high-level PhD academic type thinking. These are skills that follow us throughout the lifespan and serve us every single day. So DIR in the model, obviously the D, the I, and the R, these are the core principles that guide the model. And so you can think of the DIR as the theory kind of behind it. And when you hear floor time, that refers to us putting these principles in action. It's kind of the practice. So the play piece when we're literally on the floor. Within the DIR, we'll start with the D, and that stands for developmental. So this describes the development from the perspective of the individual, where they are and where they're headed. We'll talk a little bit more about that and what kind of components are on the developmental ladder that we focus on in this model. I refers to individual differences, which are the unique ways that each of us take in, regulate, respond, and really make sense of the world around us. Our differences aren't the exception to the rule. Differences are the norm for who we are in this world as beings. And to tailor an approach such as this, we want to do what we can to try to learn as much as we can about the individual differences of the child, the family, and ourselves while we kind of negotiate this relationship and support development and learning. And within that, I guess I'm already talking about the R, that relationship piece. And within this model, we're always recognizing that relationships fuel development. It's within that context of safe and loving, responsive, resilient relationships that learning takes place. And so we always want to put that at the forefront. This is, Keith brought up this quote earlier this morning as one of his favorites from Stanley Greenspan. He is one of the founders behind the DIR model with Dr. Serena Wieder. And so self-regulation isn't just something, it is everything. And I thought we'd start there, as this is when we think about development and our developmental ladder, our very first foundational capacity is self-regulation, and being able to regulate those internal and external processes that are making sense of who we are in this world and around us. And so regulation is critically important for infants, but it's also really important for us as adults and what we need to do to get ourselves ready for driving or sharing a meal with our family or going for a run. We all self-regulate in different ways, but without that, kind of the whole pyramid can be thought of as crumbling. And as we move up from there, we start with regulation, and then we move into the next capacity, which is engaging and relating with people. So showing interest in my social world and wanting to connect with my parents, my siblings, my loved ones. And after I fall in love with those people, I want to be able to communicate my intentions, right? And we start with just our basic intentions, a simple reaching out, which is such a powerful gesture to say, hey, I love you, come closer. And as that's cooking and as we're going, this communication broadens. And so instead of just kind of a gestural intent, we start being able to communicate more complex ideas and stringing together what we often call circles of communication. So that ability to kind of have that call and response together with somebody that we love or somebody that we're relating with or playing with, and keep those communication circles going. Within that process, we're going to build even bigger again and start going into the world of complexity of emotions and symbols, and then finally into abstract reasoning. So within these different developmental capacities, a lot of the time where we're working is kind of these early foundational capacities, kind of 1 to 4 maybe, and then we dip into those higher ones. But like I said, these are capacities I think that, I'm working on all the time, every day. I still do this. And when you're thinking about what is a floor time session going to look like for my child and thinking about an entry point, we often start with kind of that assessment of understanding your child's developmental profile, what capacities are really, really solid versus which ones are a little bit shaky. And that recognizes that this developmental profile, it's not linear, right? We can have capacities for kind of logical thinking and reasoning, but also still have some really shaky vulnerabilities when it comes to regulation, right? So we're moving through that process of jumping in up high, but then maybe we're recognizing, hey, things have gotten a little bit more challenging. We're in a bit of sensory overload, or this motor demand is just a bit too much. So let's back it up. This is the context that we're referring to in the background. The next one is that I, so we'll talk about a little bit of the individual differences piece. And another quote from Dr. Greenspan is, every child wants to interact. They just might not be able to due to their unique biology. So as soon as we notice this, we find a way to get into their world until we see that gleam in their eye, and then we do it over and over again. And so we strive to explore these individual differences and make sense of them, and if we're able to better understand the sensory processing capacities of a child, their visual spatial skills, their language capacities, this is all incredibly important information that helps guide us as OTs or as parents to tweak, and we use the word tailor, right, which is kind of creating different ways that how we're interacting with the child is directly informed by their individual profile. So kind of a concrete example is thinking about some children are really sensitive to loud noises. So then I'm going to be really cognizant of the tone of voice that I'm going to be using, or making sure that our sessions are not at the same time as a basketball game playing in the field next door. But it can become quite a bit more nuanced than that when we're really looking at modulation skills and the complexities of, motor skill acquisition and sensory processing. We'll move a little bit further into the R piece and just building into that place of there's no greater feeling than being understood. It's within these relationships, as I mentioned, that we grow and we learn. And it's within that relationship of understanding and empathy that we feel like we want to take a little bit of a step outside of our comfort zone. And it's those little steps kind of into that unknown, into that challenge that continue to foster learning. Right. But we want to really, really prioritize that relationship has to come first. And that's really imperative. And this really, really differentiates, in my opinion, the differences between kind of a relationship-based approach like the DIR model versus kind of more behavioral approaches that would prioritize the skill building or the skill acquisition first, and then kind of dissecting what is needed in that skill. Let's bolster those components. Those are kind of top-down approaches. And this is when we're starting at the base of everything, right? Let's start with safety and relationship and knowing and empathizing. And then from there, we're going to broaden and see what kind of skills are possible in that space in a really meaningful way for all of us, for the children. I think I've spoken about this. So we just want to recognize that affective interactions build social and emotional development, intelligence, and morality. And affective is a fancy word for emotional exchanges. Affect can be those big animated facial expressions of smiles, but affect can also be really subtle and nuanced. It can be just a knowing, or a all of these different things that allow us to attune and show that we are, witnessing and trying to share in these experiences with a child. We do that through these affective or kind of emotional exchanges, and in the long run, maybe we'll build to a lot more complicated communication, but we're always using that affective piece to keep things going and build that resonance. There's the broad sweeps of the theory around the D, the I, and the R. And then, as I said, floor time kind of refers to how do we put this in practice? What does this mean? What would this actually look like? If I were to bring my child to a floor time session, what am I going to be witnessing, or what am I going to be going for if I want to do floor time with my child? And so here's a summary of some of the primary principles of what a floor time session is. So we're going to be thinking with this background of those developmental capacities, profiling the child to make sense of where they're at, making sense of those individual differences, and first and foremost, wanting to aim to attune to where that child is at affectively. Are we excited? Are we a bit nervous? Are we really actually just overwhelmed and I'm not even feeling grounded in space right now? So we're going to start there. And using those power of attunement to try to support regulation with first co-regulation. We're going to regulate together and continuing to kind of regulate together in this really synergistic is the word that I want to use, but it's this flow. Keith often calls it circles of co-regulation because it's an interplay between both of us together to make sense of that. And over time, we want to build to self-regulation skills and self-regulation capacities in, for supported environments and tailored environments, but also into kind of unpredictable, unknown environments, which is really challenging. They're really, really big principle, and you'll hear this lost, is follow the child's lead. We like to tweak this to follow the child's motivation. So it's not about kind of just a follow the leader, the child goes there, so I'm going to follow the child and we're going to do that. What this model kind of challenges us to do is to think about what is meaningful and motivating for a child that we're working with, and use that as kind of a guide around what types of interactions and activities might I want to set up, right? If I know that this child just loves movement and we're really working on just getting that flow of communication happening and, you know, shared emotional experiences, I would be remiss to think I should do that just sitting on the floor. I'm going to start with movement and see how can that kind of set the stage for more complex communication. So following their motivation, following their lead. We're always trying to aim for circles of communication and seeing just how many we can get going in a long flow. We're thinking about kind of the balance of I'm going to initiate, so I'm going to open those circles, hey, or passing out a toy. But I also want to be really careful. It's not just all on me to open all those circles, right? It's also looking at, you know, what the children and the clients are, what are they opening and how am I responding to those moments with a subtle gesture or a really clear kind of verbal response. We do want to expand and challenge, you know, and broaden that zone of development when we feel like that's a safe thing to do to nurture growth. We're not always staying in that little locus of safety necessarily. That's a really important place to be and to be able to get into when we need it. But we do want to expand and challenge when it makes sense to do so, when it's appropriate for that child. And then finally, self-reflection is incredibly important for us as clinicians, you know, for the parents and the caregivers, the teachers, the BIs, the care teams, for us to be thinking about, okay, I just had this interaction and sometimes I feel just boosted and filled with energy. Let's take a minute though to think about why. What was it about those interactions or that last hour that's really got me feeling so good? Because there's going to be these incredible little pieces of information that are so powerful for us to share with other people, maybe other caregivers that are working with that child. But there's also going to be moments of things just not quite working, and self-reflection and being able to try to make sense of kind of what are our individual differences? What are we bringing into an interaction? Is that matching in a really, is there a good fit there with us and the child, or were we actually at odds today and that made our relationship really tense and it wasn't the best situation? How might I tweak that and change that moving forward? So that reflection is continuous, you know, it's ongoing, and parent coaching is a really important part of this model. And we're always encouraging families and supportive of families that want to participate in sessions. So, you know, we can all be on the floor together and continue to have these reflective conversations to, you know, to continue to make sense of how we get to tailor these interactions. How do we get to play together in the most fruitful way that just feels good? You know, it can make it really, really jargony, but sometimes that's the best cue to know if we're doing floor time right. Did you feel it? Did you see that gleam in your child's eye? If there was that gleam, awesome. Let's follow that and see where it's going to take us and what kind of skill opportunities are going to open up.
And I think Alysha, and we can do that out loud with the child as well, and so that we can just say, oh, I didn't mean to scare you, or oh, I didn't realize. And doing that even without that many words, like oh, sorry about that, and so that the kid is seeing you self-reflect, and so they know you're thinking about what they're doing. And it lets you do it in real time, as well as if there's other therapists or working with another child in the room, they get to see what we think the child is thinking. And then Alysha and I go upstairs and do it all over again without the kids there. So that we also encourage that reflective process. Self-reflection is also a group process at times. But I just wanted to kind of just make sure that everyone knew that it would be something that you're working on with the kids, and then as they get up to level 6, then that reflected their ability to reflect on what we might try to get, you know, from them, it might be a little bit greater, but certainly when they're just struggling with regulation, as when we're struggling with regulation, we're really not thinking about self-reflection. We're thinking, I always use your flight's been canceled at the airport analogy. It's like, I'm not very regulated during those moments, and the people at the counter are probably not that regulated, and you're kind of knowing that you're not and going to be engaging in higher level thinking, and that when the kid is in that state too, they're not going to be. So we kind of just take a step back and don't expect them to be at level 4. We kind of go back to just trying to help them co-regulate or figure out how to regulate by themselves. And yeah, I'm sorry. I meant to just say that one little piece about that, and then I got started. So go ahead, Alysha. Sorry for interrupting.
Oh, it's great. This is where I'd love to open it up and segue into more of a conversation. Whether there's some questions, or I'll pass it over to you, Sarah.
Yeah, that actually segues nicely into one of the questions was, would parents or caregivers be able to sort of use these techniques at home? And it sounds like absolutely they can.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It was designed, like there should be a bit of parent coaching that happens. And the original design was for parents to be able to do things at home so that they would be able to have a lot more hours of practice with the children, and having specific times to do floor time versus just trying to interact with them, just so that they can get some of the practice principles under their belt before you start floor timing everything. Because like Alysha and I will floor time relationships with people, interpersonal relationships, or my family members when I go home to visit, things like that. It's quite helpful.
Now, is this aimed at a certain age, or anyone could, benefit?
I think anybody could benefit. We have had children that started at a much older age, and the nice thing is that working on making sure, or trying to help them figure out when the first 4 levels kind of fall apart for them, and then how to repair the relationship so that they're more able to engage in those higher levels is great, because it just it makes the flow a lot more easy for them. And they seem to enjoy their relationships with people more after that. But I mean, it can be at any age, and it's the practitioner or the parent who just needs some guidance and kind of figuring out where they're at, and then having, in terms of the developmental level, and then what kind of scaffolding strategies you would use to kind of help them regulate as you're bringing them up to a higher level, or following them up to a higher level sometimes, which is great. Sometimes you have to know when to just follow them and realize that they're doing something incredible, and just let it happen, and just make sure that they know you're interested.
Yeah, one of the questions, and you covered a lot of this, was, is this helpful for self-regulation? But clearly, absolutely it is, because that was one of the first things you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. Now, would this work in conjunction with another type of therapy, maybe more behavioral-based therapy, or would you want to sort of just focus on floor time?
No, I mean, many of our clients, have full care teams. With behavior consultants and BIs and speech therapists. Absolutely, it can be synergistic. I mean, and then we also have some families that say, I'm building a floor time kind of informed, or a relationship-based informed team, and that resonates the strongest with us. And there are consultants out there that, are learning more and more about these relationship-based approaches, and are using that information to inform kind of the style of practice that they offer. But no, there's nothing that says that this would need to be done in isolation necessarily. And a lot of the time it's, because so much of it is to do with us getting to know who we are and getting to know our children and the children that we're working with. And that is just incredibly important for anybody that is going to be working with that child, right? It's important today, it's important on the playground, it's going to be important in a different context. And so, you know, we bring our unique kind of OT lens, which is fantastic for helping to understand, right, a motor skill profile and the sensory profile of the children that we're working with. You know, we would kind of argue that that's integral information for kind of anybody that's working with this child to really get kind of to go the distance, so to speak.
Now, if someone was looking for someone who did floor time, are they always an OT, or do they need to be supervised by an OT, or could they have trained separately?
Oh no, Stanley was a psychiatrist, and so it's a multidisciplinary approach, and so any person, like there's a behavioral consultant I know who is at the second level of certification. So I mean, I think, you know, like today I was doing floor time and a little bit of behaviorism, right? And in that I didn't want the outcome that the kid was looking for, and I wasn't going to reward him for the way he was doing it. He wanted to grab something out of my hands that I was going to give him anyway. And so I said, well, I was going to give it to you anyway, but if you grab it, I'm not going to give it to you, because you know I'm gonna, as soon as you ask me for, if I'm able to give you what you want, I'm going to give it to you, but I won't give it to you when you do that. And then he says, why? I was like, well, because it's just not, I don't really like when you do that, because it's really kind of makes me sad. And using that kind of, depending on where the kid is at, like what their understanding is, to bring that piece around, and and you know, some of the motivation would really be around looking at the relationship as part of the reward, us being able to laugh together and have fun together, and for us to figure out a problem together, including trying to get the kid's idea to work. You know, of course, getting a ball to roll up a hill won't work, but we can certainly give them a go and kind of see why it won't work, because that's the way gravity is, right? But it's kind of a higher level concept for them to figure out, but it's great for them to see that we're both trying to do it and neither of us can make it happen. So maybe that's just not the way it works.
Yeah, that's great. That actually leads in really well to the next question. If you're following the motivations, how do you approach redirection of negative, you know, meltdown, self-harm, those sort of big emotions?
Well, I mean, the self-harm, I mean, if someone's is hurting themselves, I mean, I do try to figure out like what's going on for them sensory wise that they're doing this. Are they trying to block out everything else by creating a really intense sensation in their body, which is, you know, not anything most of us want, but that it blocks everything else out. And you know, I think that often helps in saying, oh my God, that was really hard for you. Oh my God, I don't know how that happened. And the more that they notice that I know what they're feeling, it tends to go down a little bit, because when they feel like I'm understanding what they're trying to communicate, it often brings some of it down. And knowing that there are some cases that are very, very difficult in terms of this, but those would be very specific approaches for those children that usually Alysha and I we do a lot of consulting with the younger therapists that we work with, so that they would be able to do that, and as well as parents.
I guess I want to, you know, touch on a little bit too when we think about kind of those quote unquote negative emotions, that those are just as valid and important for us to sit in and explore and make sense of as the feel good emotions, right? We're not always perfectly happy people. I don't want to be that plastic person, right? And I certainly don't want to nurture that in, any of the kids that we're working with. But it's making sense of those feelings, and working together so that emotions that are more challenging, whether it's frustration or anger or sadness, oftentimes those can be, really dysregulating and overwhelming for the kids that we're working with, right? And we tend to kind of, well, I know that's super dysregulating, so maybe I'm going to try to steer clear of that. Well, sure, that kind of helps in the short term, but these are natural human emotions, and we want to make sure that, or not make sure, but work so that those aren't quite so profoundly dysregulating, right? I think they all have a little bit of that kind of effect on us. If I get suddenly startled or a loved one does something that really hurts me, my foundation is going to be rocked. My regulatory skills are going to change, and I'm not going to be able to do what I usually can that day. But trying to work through that, and holding that space and, supporting that social emotional learning piece like Keith was talking about. Sometimes there are kids that, I was getting yelled at a fair bit by a child, and it really wasn't about me. They were coping with a lot of really big emotions, but a lot of it was kind of being funneled at me. But we were at a space of learning it, where it was okay for me to say, what, when you yell at me like this, like that really, that hurts.
Rafa, ¿te sientes bien? ¿Así?
That doesn't make me want to be with you anymore. That's really hard. And that's not language that I would necessarily use with everybody, but for this child, it was appropriate. And it was really important to kind of differentiate, it's okay to express anger, but that it can be really hurtful when you target it at people that you do care about, and there will be social fallout for that, right?
Yeah, and being able to say, like, using the relationship piece, so you have a relationship with them. And so if Alysha was with a kid that was doing this, and she might say, Keith, this guy's doing this a lot, and then I might make sure I'm in the room while she's there. And then when he does something that is even slightly towards that behavior, or is, she doesn't have to be completely hurt for this to happen, but she gets to say, you know what, I need a minute, I'm going to go out of the room. And her withdrawing that even for 30 seconds tells him, like, well, you can't do that and then have this same relationship. And and then I'm standing there, it's like, you need to give her a minute. When she's ready, she'll be able to come back. But it kind of hurt. And often those are the kids actually who have a really, really high pain threshold, so they're actually not feeling pain when as other people are, or other kids. So they could be hitting you and they have no idea what you're talking about, because they don't really, it doesn't hurt them when somebody does that to them. And for them to just know that whatever that is, you have to honor the other person's limit. And and that seems to bring it around faster than anything. And then realizing too that some of these kids often have like a delayed processing or reception of the low registration of the sensation. And so those are also the kids who wind up having limited interoceptive capacities. And so it can get really pretty complicated, because those are often the kids who will do things that that are self-harming, and half the time, like, they don't feel it. That's part of it. And so when the kid does feel something, and they'll tend to feel bony pain before they feel soft tissue pain, like just letting them sit in it. Because like when those kids get hurt, we get shocked and we're like, oh, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. And instead of like, wow, that really hurt, letting them cry it out, I'm going to stay with you until this goes away, so that they can just kind of better process that more that the emotions that we find harder, more challenging to be around, right? But it's like that, it also helps them feel more secure, so that the next time it happens, the kind of neurotransmitter explosion that is happening won't happen quite as much. It won't be as much of a storm, because they know they have a circle of security around them.
That's very similar to what you're talking about, to a question in the chat. For behaviors like self-interest behaviors, regression, how can you explain things to a child who also has an intellectual disability or very limited language skills? That was from one of the chat questions.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I do a lot of miming. Like, today there was a kid who just like, she wanted getting onto the sling swing we have, but she was on top of a small like air cushion. And so when she went to sit down, like she usually does, she misjudged the space and she tumbled onto the cushion and landed on her backside, and then was so shocked about what happened that it took her a while she couldn't figure out what happened. And so I went over and I mimed what happened. And she got to see what it looked like and I said, oh, my bottom missed the swing. And then she looked at me, thought about it for a minute, and then got up and tried again. And so I didn't really have to, sometimes that kind of demonstration helps quite a bit, but they communicate very differently. And so it can be a bit of a challenge. I was around a lot of babies when I was younger, and I waited tables in very busy restaurants that were loud with people who didn't speak any English. So it was a tourist restaurant. And so I just figured out how to mime and read people's faces. And, we can tune in and get a bit better at that. And sometimes using some visuals helps as well. And sometimes it doesn't have to be a word. It can be, a different shape or squiggle, or using kind of like splat, or those kind of words that kind of say what they mean, or sound like what they mean, rather than trying to work on the vocabulary.
Yeah, that's great. Is there data collection during these sessions or by parents? No.
The data collection isn't required. The studies that were done used different markers that were based on standardized assessments rather than just data collection. And so there was a control group, and so for the parents, what we asked them to do is to write down what they understood to happen, and also we use video. So we have them show us a video of them working together, and so the data is right there. They see what we see, and we bring it back to the exact second. And we use video just for our own reflective practice, because you watch the video and there are times when you say, oh my gosh, I can't believe I missed that they actually figured out what I was trying to say, but it was right after I turned away, and so that sort of thing. So using that technology is fantastic. And then having that's part of being able to coach somebody and how to do it better. I mean, Alysha, I met Alysha 6 years ago, and I was watching her presentation. I was like, oh my God, there she is. And it was all through the same process. So we certainly can do this quite a bit with parents or with BIs, or we use OTAs as well. And it's pretty good.
That's
we
great.
can send you some of the studies as well.
Yeah.
We have a list of the research, and we can send that to you as well.
Yeah, I will mention now I'm going to send a follow-up email, so I can include the slides or any research resources that anyone wants from this. And we'll be sending a survey as well, so people can let us know, if it worked, what didn't work, and future talks. But yeah, if anyone's looking for more stuff on floor time, I'd be happy to include that in anything that you guys send as well. So if they want to learn more, I'll include the email of Little Buddies as well on the website, but where could they go to learn more? And do they have RASP floor time? Is there a list that people could go for under 6?
Yeah. So on the resources that we'll send out at the end of today, we'll share a kind of a series of different links where you can learn more about floor time from numerous different organizations that are kind of research-based. We'll share a directory link that lets you look up floor time providers within your region. And there are absolutely many RASP professionals that are also have DIR certification, and that would be a question to ask them. Certainly, and welcome to come to us at Little Buddies. And we're kind of, the floor time community is big but well connected, probably. We can do our best to try to connect families if we can.
And if you're looking to like learn more in this sort of a format, like the Affect Autism website is fantastic. They have lots of some of the top people in the US who've been have been doing it and were trained by Stanley himself that are there. Alysha did a really nice toileting presentation for them. And it's nice because they also give you the takeaways. So if you're a parent and you're just looking at the takeaways of what the talk was about, because it was all started by a mom with a child on the spectrum who then used her interactions with these professionals to help other parents.
If there's any more questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And again, I'll be sending a follow-up email if anyone has further questions they want me to forward through. I can certainly do that after. Yeah, perfect. There's Affect Autism is right there in the chat for everyone. That's great. I think we'll probably wrap up shortly if there's no more questions. I want to say a huge thank you, Alysha and Keith, for coming today. That was very informative. I think that was really great. So huge thank you to you both. We really appreciate it. Thank you to everyone who came. We do have a lot of talks on our YouTube, which I will include in the follow-up email as well. And we have another talk coming up on Friday at 10 a.m. on sexual health education, which I think will be a really good one as well. And I can include the registration for that. But again, you guys, that was wonderful. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you too. Very nice to be here.
Thanks for having us.